Good morning. It is nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces, and to have a chance to explore together. How many of you are in the Introduction to Judaism program? Sort of. Okay. That's good to know. Welcome to all of you. That's very exciting. I'm delighted to see that you're using the textbook that we produced at American Jewish University. We're very proud of that, and we're very proud of you. So enjoy the journey. I want us to get on the balcony and think about why be Jewish. And I want to start off by saying that the question itself is a uniquely Jewish question. By which I mean, I don't think French people wake up in the morning and think, why be French? I am certain that my dog doesn't wake up in the morning and think, why be dog? Like, you just are, that's all. You are, and you get up and you go about your day. But Jewish people have a way of making questions where no one else sees a question. So I just want to highlight that there is some degree of pathology in thinking that you have to justify breathing. Like, the answer to why be Jewish could be just because I am. You got a problem with that? And the fact that we've internalized that there's a problem, that it needs to be explained why we're Jewish, I just want to acknowledge that that may be some larger psychological hang-up, but nonetheless, we have it, and so I'm going to try to answer the question anyway. What I want to start with by saying is that there are some things we know that don't work. So guilt, which for a long time was a very effective motivator to why be Jewish, is underperforming of late, right? I don't know if people have developed an antibody to it, or it's just culturally impossible anymore, but even people who frankly should be feeling guilty these days don't, and all the more so people who have no reason to feel guilty just walk around not feeling guilty. I personally don't understand that, but that's the world. Sermons don't seem to work. I have given many of them. The woman who funded our rabbinical school, Ruth Ziegler, was someone who never attended synagogue, and yet she has inflicted more sermons on people than probably any other single person in the world by training hundreds of rabbis who then go inflicting sermons on people. And I will tell you that the Jewish people have developed a way of containing rabbinic sermons. You've probably already picked up on it. You listen to the sermon. If you can, you use that as doze-off time. You try to look thoughtful while you close your eyes. I will tell you that stops working when you start to drool and your head falls over. But people do that a lot. I see that this room comfortably sleeps about 200, so that's good. Okay. And then what you do is you walk out of the room, and as you're leaving, you put out your hand to the rabbi and you say, really good sermon, Rabbi. And when the rabbi touches your hand, anything you absorb from the sermon goes through your arm back into the rabbi from whence it came, and you walk out as pure as a newborn babe. And nostalgia doesn't work. Nostalgia doesn't work in part because more and more people don't have anything to remember. Right? The idea that, my father grew up in Brooklyn, the original Jewish homeland, and he grew up within 4 blocks of all of his aunts and uncles and all of his cousins. And they spent every Sunday having lox and bagels and playing basketball on the streets of Brooklyn. And while he regretted that I don't have any memories like that, I point out to him that he's the one that left Brooklyn to move to San Francisco, where we didn't know anybody. So we have generations of people who, even though born Jewish, don't have memories of Jewish communal life. And then, thank God, we've been blessed by a lot of people who have chosen to join us, and they, through no fault of their own, have no memories of Jewish people. That may be partly why they find us attractive. So try not to blow that for them too soon. When I point out to my wife, an interesting statistic, the most popular demographic for marriage in the United States, if you ask women, what group would you rather your husband come from? The number one answer is a Jewish man. My wife would like to have equal time, and she says that's because they don't know you. But you can't have nostalgia if you don't have experience, and we all don't have experience. Those who were born Jewish and those who were chosen Jewish were kind of blank slates in that regard. So what works? I'd like to make a more American pitch for why be Jewish, which is, what's in it for me? What do I get out of this whole Jewish thing? Why should I bother? And the first thing I want to say is there are three basic human needs that all people have that are profoundly addressed, uniquely addressed by Judaism, Jewish practice, and Jewish wisdom. And the first of those three things is connection. It should not be news to any of you that Americans today, I think in fact people throughout the world, are suffering an epidemic of loneliness. Right? We see that in studies that are being done. You have experience of it in your own life. People are more lonely than at any point that we've been measuring loneliness. And I want to jump in and say, loneliness is not the same thing as being alone. You can be alone and feel surrounded by loved ones. You can be in a crowded room and feel completely invisible and isolated. That's lonely. And Americans are grotesquely, tragically lonely right now. So let me tell you a story. I mentioned this to those of you who are here on Friday night. Grandmother's closets are magical spaces, right? The stuff that those old women pack away in their closets open up universes, right? And many pleasant childhood hours were spent going through my grandmother's closets and discovering hidden treasures. But this is a story about my daughter and hidden treasures. She was about 5 years old, my daughter Shira, and we were visiting my mother's house in San Francisco. And because we had a little spare time, I suggested to her that she might want to go rummaging through my mother's closet. I, of course, am an adult and I don't do such things. But I was supervising Shira going through my mother's closet. Honey, try over there. No, the next one. Open that one. Let's see what's in there. And she came across a shoebox, which she opened up. And inside that shoebox was Monique. Monique is a stuffed cat, right? A doll that I had as a little boy, not an actual cat. Very sensitive people here. Monique had been a gift from my grandparents when I was an infant, and I had loved Monique. And Monique looked like she had barely survived my childhood. The hair was mostly gone. The eyes had fallen out. My mom had sewed X's where the eyes used to be. I blame her for that, but what can you do? The mouth had been sewn on again because it apparently had fallen off, and so the mouth was now a permanent frown. Again, my mother has many, many gifts, but apparently fixing old stuffed cats isn't on the list. And Shira picked up Monique and said, "What's this?" And I said, "That's Monique. She was my cat when I was a little boy." And Shira took the cat and hugged it and said, "Now she belongs to both of us." And you all go, "Oh," because that's touching. But I will tell you, the odds of Monique making it to the next generation is close to zilch. And she doesn't have any deep history. She's just a doll that I had as a kid. But if you're looking for connections across the generations, you need look no farther than Jewish practice. Because that Torah scroll has been passed from generation to generation for the last 3,000 years. Not this particular scroll. I know you're a little concrete in your thinking, so this is not it. But the writing we have carried with us as a people around the world. And we have been inspired and strengthened by that book. Every time grandparents pass that scroll to their children and their children pass it to their children, you're looking at something unique in the annals of human history. You're looking at the successful transmission of a tradition across the ages. And I want to give you a sense of how extraordinary that is. I'm going to repeat a story. When I was in college, I grew up not at all religious, pretty much an anti-religious household. Growing up in San Francisco Bay Area, it's actually a great place to grow up an atheist because there are so many fun things you can get away with in the Bay Area that you may not be able to elsewhere. So I had a very happy childhood in San Francisco, being anti-religious, and I found God in college. And it was falling in love with God that got me to fall in love with Judaism, although technically I had always been Jewish. So I tell people that I am a convert in everything but the label. So I had a friend whose mother had passed away and he needed help making a minyan. And I don't know what a minyan is, but I'm handy, so I figured I could help make whatever it is that he needed me to make. And so we went to this minyan, and there were men sitting on one side of the room and women sitting on the other side of the room, and the men were all wrapped in leather. And did I mention I'm from San Francisco? I am from San Francisco, so I'm familiar with this. But apparently, Jewish men wrapped in leather and sitting separately means something very different than what it means in San Francisco. If you don't get that, don't worry about it. I'm not going to be the one to explain it to you. So I was home with my grandparents for the winter break, and I told my grandmother about that, and she went into the closet of magic, and she pulled out a paper bag, and in it were her father's tefillin. Tefillin are those leather boxes that contain biblical verses that Jewish men wrap themselves in. She had my great-grandfather's tefillin. So I have been wearing them. This morning when we prayed, I was wearing my great-grandfather's tefillin. That beats Monique by 4 generations. And they have found tefillin on Masada. They have found tefillin that Jewish men were wearing 2,000 years ago. So if you're looking for a way to connect across the generations, there is nothing like Judaism for making those connections. My grandparents' parents came to America from Russia. My grandmother's parents brought with them one thing from the old world, well, 2. They brought silver candlesticks and they brought a silver Hanukkah menorah, which I light every year. If you're looking for a way to connect across the generations, something that links you to those who've gone before and to those who are coming after, welcome to Judaism. Because there's nothing here that doesn't connect us across the generations, midor ledor, from generation to generation. Second, every human being has a deep need for what I call context. That is to say, meaning. Biologically speaking, human life is a lot of effort that leads to nothing. We are all finite. We all have a limited span on this planet. The cemeteries are filled with famous and very important people that nobody remembers anymore. Much of what they did fades away into insignificance. Much of their perspectives are now outdated or simply wrong. So if you're looking for the fact of being to provide meaning, you're looking in the wrong place. Meaning does not come out of existence. Meaning comes out of relationship. It's what we do with and for each other that, while it may not abide in time, never loses its significance. That's why the Bible says that love is greater than death. Long after the lovers are gone, their stories inspire. Romeo and Juliet will always make people cry, right? And the ability to find things that our lives can grab onto that are bigger than our biology, bigger than our mortality or our finitude, that I believe is humanity's search for meaning. But there too, look at the power of our tradition. So for 10 years, I was a congregational rabbi in Southern California. Since then, I've been running a rabbinical school in Los Angeles. If any of you are interested in becoming rabbis, come talk to me. But during those 10 years, the period in my life that my mother refers to as when I was a rabbi, I had the pleasure of teaching B'nai Mitzvah kids. And they would come into my office and we would read the ancient words of the prophet Isaiah or Micah or Amos. And the miracle that they didn't notice, but I did, was that a 12-year-old American would find meaning in words that are 2,700 years old, spoken in the Iron Age, 9,000 miles away. If you had them read Gilgamesh or Homer, there'd be nothing there. They don't talk to those gods. They don't share those values. They find the stories drawn out and boring. But the words of Isaiah, that what God wants from you is to feed the hungry, show compassion to the homeless and to the widow, that if you do that, then your light will shine at night as though it's the brightest day. Those lifelines of meaning, they inspire our 12-year-olds. Can you think about how extraordinary that is? Is there a people in the world who have that kind of reach, that kind of continuity? Our ancestors were people, biological or spiritual ancestors, they were people who understood God to be the greatest liberatory force in the cosmos. They understood our God, the God of Israel, to be a God who invites slaves to walk to freedom. And that hopeful faith inspired them to influence humanity in a way that no other people have. Let me share with you an anomaly that always strikes me as remarkable. Jews are 0.03% of the human population. There are very few of us to go around. There are more Dutch Amish than there are us. Somebody's underperforming. In English, there's a word for people who aren't part of that 0.03%. Isn't that weird? Like, there's a word, Gentile, which means you're part of the 99% of humanity. There's a word for that. There is not a word in English for people who aren't Chinese. Chinese are 1/4 of humanity. If there should be a word for someone who's not something, there should be a word for someone who's not Chinese. There's no word for people who aren't British or aren't French or aren't Nigerian. But there's a word that non-Jews know for if you're not Jewish. Isn't that crazy? Did you ever think about that? How odd that is? Right? Because apparently we loom large in humanity's imagination. I wonder if that's in part because we were the people who insisted that every human being is made in God's image. And we've never been forgiven for that. Right? We're the people who taught the world you have to pay a laborer their wages. We insisted that you have to let the earth rest. We insisted that you cannot muzzle a cow and a donkey together because you have to take into concern the needs of that person. We limited what you could do with and to a slave. And the world has never forgotten and has not really accommodated. And that message spread. That message spread not only through our own efforts, but through our daughter religions, through Islam and Christianity. The amazing thing now is, if you, well, here's something I never do. I never tell people on an airplane that I'm a rabbi, right? Because I end up immediately sucked into a conversation I desperately want to get out of immediately. And nowhere to go, right? They won't let you sit on the wing, right? So at 3,500 feet, 35,000 feet, you end up having conversations about people's bad Hebrew school experiences if they're Jewish, right? And if they're Gentiles, then you wind up having conversations about, is he or is he not the Son of God? Which I have an opinion about. Or even weirder, is he or is he not the Pope? Like, is the Pope satanic? Is the Pope the head of the church? This one I actually don't have an opinion about. I have no flesh in that game, so I could care less. But the people on the plane have really strong opinions about all that stuff. And once you tell them you're a rabbi, they want to know what you think about that stuff. But here's the really interesting thing. I can be sitting on the plane with someone whose ancestors were part of the Germanic tribes that brought down the Roman Empire. Their ancestors ran through, as Disraeli said, the Black Forest, buck naked, painting their tushies with berry juice and screaming all the time, right? And when I say Isaiah, they think that's part of their heritage, which it is. But that's amazing. We live in a world in which the God of Israel is now shared with the majority of humanity. That's pretty unlikely. I will tell you that the competing gods, Baal, for example, the god of the Canaanites, hasn't done nearly so well, right? Our book, the Bible, every single day outsells any other book. And it has been consistently doing that for 2,000 years, right? That book, by the way, when it has a competitor, the competitor is generally a knockoff of the Bible. So I think of Harry Potter, which was the greatest commercial success in the book world in my lifetime. Harry Potter is about a kid who gets raised not by his biological family, discovers that there's an evil sovereign who has it in for his people and wants to take over the world, and he discovers magical powers which allow him to resist this tyrant. Was I holding this for no reason the whole time? Okay. I'm happy to answer that question. So I grew up an atheist, as I mentioned, um, and and nothing against atheism. There are many wonderful atheists, and there are many religious jerks. So you know, we each find our own path. There were two things I think that happened in college. Well, three. One is it could have honestly been hormonal, meaning I also met the woman who I've been married to for 40 years that same semester. So I could have been just looking for love all over the place, and I found Ilana and I found God, and 40 years later, I'm with the same God and the same woman. So it could, you know, we come up with fancy reasons, but it just could be biology. Um, but I think it's two additional things. One is I grew up in a home with very strong values of justice. And my atheist mom is one of the most righteous people I know. But she doesn't have a logical basis for it. Like if there's nothing out there but us, then morality is just consensus. And the majority wins. So if people want to kill Flipper for a tuna sandwich, that's, you may not like that, but it's not immoral unless someone else is the source of morality. And if there are more Nazis than there are Jews, then murdering Jews is by definition not immoral because it's what the majority wants. But my mother never, ever thought that morality was decided by a majority vote. And it was because of my atheist mom that I started to think there has to be something to ground morality in that is bigger than human consensus, that there are absolute standards of right or wrong. I don't care how many people line up on the other side. And that led me to thinking about God as the basis for moral judgment. And at the same time, in college, I had two Christian roommates who were among the finest people I've ever met. And I love them to this day. We're still in touch. I couldn't believe what they believed. It's a whopper of a story. Um, and that didn't tempt me at all, but it did make me want to think about God. So I went to talk to the rabbi on campus, and he said there's no neutral place to think about God from. You have to try it out and see if it works for you. So he got me to agree to go to synagogue services every Shabbat for 2 months. He said, less than 2 months, you're going to spend the whole time worrying about, am I supposed to be standing or sitting or shuffling forward or shuffling back? And like, so you need to go long enough that you're not obsessed by that stuff anymore. And then he gave me a book to read by a German Jewish philosopher named Franz Rosenzweig. Rosenzweig was a Jewish existentialist, and he also grew up in an assimilated home, and he also came to Judaism as an adult. I read the book. I started going to services. I fell in love. I fell in love. And so this doesn't work for everybody, but for me, my first love was God. And then because God told me I had to read Torah, I started reading Torah. It's not that I was in love with Jewish culture or Jewish people and then found God. It was the other way around. One of the things I resent about anti-Semites is they haven't earned it. Unlike a Jewish professional, if anyone's going to hate the Jewish people, it should be, I can tell you stories. These Johnny-come-latelys who waltz in and think they can hate the Jews, please get online. But because God told me I needed a community, I had to have a minyan. And God told me that I need to read Torah, so I read Torah. So, and I have fallen in love head over heels with Torah and the Jewish people too. But for me, God has always been at the center. And I have a very personal relationship with God, which, by the way, if you're looking for a rebellion against your atheist psychoanalyst mom, this is about as good as it gets. Because I tell her that I talk to God and God talks back to me, And for a Freudian analyst, that's no different than saying I talk to Mickey Mouse and Mickey Mouse answers me. So it scores points on that level too. I get the afterlife and I get to aggravate my mother, both in the same shot. Yeah. So that is true. You can indeed. There's one of my favorite passages in the Talmud. The rabbis are having a conversation with God, and they pose to God, if you could choose between people forgetting you and studying Torah, or forgetting Torah and following you, which would you prefer? And God said, I would rather that they study Torah, because the Torah will bring them back to me. What if we entertain the idea that believing in God isn't something you say, it's something you show? So is the sanctimonious person who sits in judgment of everybody else because of a theological doctrine, is that person a God believer? Or is the person who feeds the hungry and is compassionate when they see someone crying, but doesn't think there's some metaphysical being out there, is that person a God lover? I'm pretty clear what I think. I think that you put the emphasis on, you know, God loving is something you demonstrate. Don't talk to me about how much you love God. Let me watch you. Let me follow you through the day, and I will see by the way you treat God's creatures whether you are a God lover or not. So absolutely, you can convert to Judaism as far as I'm concerned. You can be a Jew in good standing and not think that there's someone out there. But you have to engage in Torah, you have to engage in mitzvot, you have to engage in community. Ultimately, I think there's a harmony there, but for some people, there isn't. And I think one last comment about that. That's partly because of the people who love God, right? There's nobody who's harmed God's reputation more than religious people, right? Because they make God look vicious and cruel and hostile to learning and an enemy of curiosity. It's as if for these people, following God shuts down their intellect and hardens their heart. So I think we religious people, those of us who are, we need to be compassionate to the people who've been traumatized by religion. And the word God has been used to burn witches at the stake and to kill gay and lesbian and trans people. And so people have come to a traumatic relationship with that G word that is honestly earned. So again, I want to shift the focus. Show me that you love God by loving God's children. Show me that you honor God by honoring God's creation. Show me that you love God by living a life of joy and decency and compassion. Don't talk to me about your theology. God's spokespeople.
Nothing is more true than, so I find that curious because that came from, Jewish belief. So it just, it kind of boggles my mind a little bit. So I'm just kind of curious.
Okay. Look, anti-Semitism is a very complicated phenomenon that changes over time. So I can give you some broad comments, but ancient Greek anti-Semitism is very different than Nazi anti-Semitism. which also means you need to look at what the solution is that each anti-Semite proposes, right? So the solution to Greek anti-Semitism is to stop practicing Judaism. That's not the solution to Nazi anti-Semitism. That's actually what scares them. Jews who mingle and mix and then they don't know who's Jewish or not is the problem for a Nazi anti-Semite. So you have to specify. But why is the hatred of Jews so ubiquitous? I have a couple answers for that. The first is, I tell my dog all the time that we are not as impressive as she thinks we are. Human beings are descended from the large apes. Those creatures also have anger management issues, right? Fortunately, they don't have the kind of shoulder bones that allow them to pitch accurately. So when you go to the zoo and the gorilla gets mad at you and wants to fling feces, they have to throw sideways like this. And so it just goes everywhere except where they're aiming. But we have inherited their temper and better shoulders. So we get pissed at everybody. Like, I mean, think about the history of humanity is the history of hating everyone who's different. And if they're not really different, then inventing differences to hate people by, right? European culture divided people into noble and not noble, right? And if you weren't noble, you were low, right? The whole of civilization is a hierarchy of hate and a glimmering of a different way. So our culture is rooted, our American and Western culture has one foot in ancient Israel and one foot in ancient Rome. And we are constantly tempted by empire. And empire works by mobilizing and monopolizing fear. It needs you to be afraid. It needs you to be afraid of some imagined enemy, and then it needs you to be afraid of the government. And that isn't the Hebrew way, right? So we're the people who taught the world, unlike what the Greeks and the Romans and the Babylonians and the Egyptians and the Assyrians and just about everybody taught. We taught that God cares for the lowly and the weak. That's a radical teaching then, it's a radical teaching now. We taught the world that the government is accountable to the law, not the other way around. And that the king has to write a Torah scroll and keep it by the throne to make sure that the king remembers that he is a servant of that Torah, not the other way around. We are the people who produced a prophet Nathan who could walk into King David's court and say, I accuse you, you are the man, right? And David doesn't have him killed. David repents. I don't think the world has ever accommodated that. Every year, the Roman emperor would launch a speech in the Senate by saying, I and my armies are well. There was one recorded time in the Roman Empire where that didn't happen. That was when they had the Jewish revolt. And Hadrian, for 3 years in a row, couldn't start his speech that way. We have always been a thorn in the side of tyrants. When Ben Franklin proposed a motto and a seal for the United States, he opposed the idea of having a bald eagle. He said bald eagles are very unimpressive creatures. They're physically lovely, but they live by stealing other people's foods, right? That's, they attack littler birds and they take their fish, right? Do you really want to be named after that? He said, but what he proposed was a seal that showed the children of Israel marching to freedom, Pharaoh caught in the sea, and the motto, sic semper tyrannus, thus always to tyrants. Franklin recognized that this country should be based on Hebrew roots, that seeing God as the one who wants us all to thrive is a sounder grounding for democracy and for humanity than power that can be achieved. This country has not resolved that split. We're still fighting it out. And I don't want you to hear this as a partisan dig. I want to tell you there are people, unfortunately, across the political spectrum who are Roman in their approach to power and not Hebrew. So we need to be allies. But I don't think the world can forgive us for that. I don't think it can forgive us for having an alternative approach to humanity that frankly they need when they're broken, but then they forget. Others. Yeah.
Oh, no.
No, they can't.
Oh, okay. I have a quick story about Jewish connection. I was in Florida. I went to a synagogue, a very large synagogue. They were very nice to me. They gave me an honor being although in Florida in the winter, there's a lot of people who come from all over, so no big deal. So there were a lot of people. The rabbi even said there are no Jews in Toronto or Montreal in the winter. They're all in Florida. So anyway, we had the service and then we had lunch. And I just didn't feel like getting in line for lunch. I didn't know, any people there. And I see a random lady and just standing there. So I went up to talk to her and we, started getting acquainted, and she was from Montreal. So I said, "Oh, I have cousins in Montreal, who, by the way, I don't know very well, but I know, we know each other exists." And she said, "Oh, really? What's the name of your cousin?" Montreal is very large. So I tell her, and she said, "Oh, yeah, I worked with Shifra for 15 years." That's a Jewish story about connection.
So let me tell you another story about Jewish connection. I have the pleasure of having ordained the chief rabbi of Uganda, whose community the Abba Yudaya chose to be Jewish about 90 years ago. And his son-in-law is now in the rabbinical school. And so I will go back to Uganda a second time for another installation when he is ordained. And I took my then 15-year-old daughter with me to Africa. At some point, you should treat yourself to a trip to the Abba Yudaya community. It's extraordinary. But I wanted Shira to see that although they don't look like her and they don't know what lox and bagels are and probably would think it was slimy, and they don't have any Ashkenazic traditions there because they're not Ashkenazic, that in fact they were her brothers and sisters, and that no Jew anywhere in the world is ever alone, because anywhere there's a Jewish community, you have brothers and sisters. And that is a really powerful reality that we often take for granted. There's an ancient midrash, an ancient rabbinic legend that says that if you hit a cow on its foot, the cow hurts. If you hit it on its back, the cow hurts. And the same thing with a Jew. If you hurt a Jewish community in Yemen, Jews in Nashville scream out. Right? We are all together in all of this, and that is a special source of strength too. Any others? Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. The question is about the potential of technology to advance Jewish connection and human connection. So here's, I'm a big believer in the potential of technology, both for good and for bad. Judaism has, I think, a brilliant understanding of both a Yetzer HaTov, a good impulse, and a Yetzer Hara, an evil impulse. There is no good thing that people can't pervert, and there's no thing that people can't use to elevate. So the issue is not, is technology good or bad? The question is, what do we do with it? What do we use it for? I have a YouTube channel. I put out videos and podcasts for people. And I have a Facebook page with about 90,000 likes because, let's face it, I'm just easy to like. And I don't know why you all laughed at that. Thank you. The technology has the capacity for great goodness. Injustices get instantly put out there and shared, and then can be corrected. It also has the capacity for great evil. People whose lives are made miserable, comparing the reality of their own life with the curated versions of other people's lives. Time spent flipping, doom scrolling, they call it, you know, so that I now get upset about anti-Semites I never would have heard about and have no impact on my life whatsoever, but I'm aggravated by them nonetheless. And the way it takes over our lives, right? It's now impossible to disconnect. So there's always email that need to be answered. There's always things that need a response. So I think there too, the challenge for us is, how do we utilize this in a way that advances our thriving and our humanity? And that takes conscious choice. But the capacity of this media to lift up our lives, to connect us to each other, to inform us. You know, my mom lives in San Francisco. She's 90. And I don't get to visit her as often as I would like, but I speak to her every single day. And she's able to see my face, which makes it possible for her to hear what I'm saying. And I'm able to have that connection to her because of the technology. So I'm deeply grateful for it. We need to own it, meaning we need to determine how to use it and how not to use it. So I hope that answered your question. Yes?
Are there other people in the world who, when they read a bad thing that happens to somebody, or something, their first thought is, I hope they weren't?
Well, I don't think there are non-Jews who think that. But yes, I think if you talk to many minority people, they read the news the way we do. You know, back when newspapers were on paper, I used to read the paper twice. Right? I would flip through it once to make sure no Jew was in trouble, and then I would start at the beginning and read the news based on significance. Right? But I know plenty of African Americans who read the news exactly the same way. Plenty of Arab Americans right now who are reading the news the same way. I think any minority reads the news in that defensive posture. Go ahead. Wonderful. So first of all, Mazal Tov. It is greater than you can imagine. You are in for a life-transforming treat on a level you can't imagine. Whatever your fantasies are, it's better. The downside of having kids is that romantic love becomes trivial. Like, you'll start wondering why there are not songs on the radio about spit up love. and wipe the fanny love, which is way more significant than let's go for a dance and a kiss. You may, in fact, finding yourself singing such songs to your infants. My wife and I have a whole line of burp songs that we developed with our twins. So it's going to be great. Second of all, be loving to them and to yourself. You will not be a perfect parent. You will make mistakes. You will fall short. You are not the first parent who will do that, and they in turn will do that too. What you're aiming for is good enough. And if you're a good enough parent, your kid is born with incredible resilience and they will be fine. So be as good as you can be and be forgiving for those moments when you're not. The only advice I want to offer you is we raised our kids in synagogue. Because they're Rabbi's kid, we would come to shul every Friday night, every Saturday morning, every Jewish holiday, and the kids just lived at the synagogue. That's a gift that will change their lives. My son continues to love synagogue. My daughter is allergic. Right? Through no fault of her own. If my wife and I need to have a conversation without Shira in the room, we just take out a prayer book and open it, and she's gone. But she knows the entire liturgy. And on a Friday night, if I hand her a cup of wine and say, can you do Kiddush? She doesn't need a book. And she knows who she is. And she knows how she wants to raise her children. And she feels a connection. And her closest friends were her synagogue friends and her camp friends. So make this your home. And get a bunch of other parents with little kids. And then here's a word for everyone else in the synagogue. If a kid is making noise in the synagogue and you can't resist the urge to turn around and look, put a smile on your face first. No glaring, no staring, right? Just a smile. And if you don't have any grandchildren locally, I know one coming up who could use some additional grandparenting. So make this room a child-friendly room where kids making noise, running up and down, being on the bima, like that's all stuff that makes you smile, because that is the biggest difference you can make. And if you're that kind of a community, by the way, you'll start to get young people showing up, right? So give up on decorum, give up on quiet, give up on calm, step into life and embrace it. But on your end, I want to encourage you to make this your home and to be here with the little one on the floor and then running around and making noise, and let that be the new normal, because that is the best childhood you can possibly give your kid. Yeah, that's my advice. I think anti-Semitism, like all bigotries, is based on the need to hate. There are people so wounded that the only way they can justify getting up in the morning is by having someone they look down on. And then they come up with reasons to point their hate in particular directions. So people who hate Black people, people who hate trans people, people who hate, I don't know, liberals, conservatives, fundamentalists, whatever. The hate comes first, and then people come up with reasons for the hate. And there are still people who don't like us because they think we killed Jesus or because we don't accept their religiosity. And some of that spills over into toxic politics. Sometimes it just stays inside their churches. It's a kind of gentle anti-Semitism, like a smelly breeze. But I think the best response to all of the hate is two. The first is examine your heart for your own hate. Who is it that you're painting with a broad brush? And who is it that you're robbing of their humanity? And then take countermeasures within. And then the second is add to the vitality of Jewish life in whatever way you can. Because the response to the haters has to be a love more resilient than their hate. Look, how we teach our children about the hate that's out there depends very much on the age of the child and their temperament. So I don't have a one size fits all. I am not one of those people who I postponed telling my kids about the Holocaust as long as I could, because I figured they're going to have a whole lifetime of knowing that. I'd rather give them some solid years of just thinking that being Jewish is the greatest thing in the world. A short story about that. I'm in Mission Viejo. There are not a lot of Jews in Mission Viejo. One of the world's largest churches, the Saddleback Church, is in Mission Viejo. And we had a deal every Thanksgiving with a Methodist church where we would share services on Erev Thanksgiving. And we did 1 year in the church, 1 year in the synagogue, back and forth. The years that the service was at the synagogue, the preacher preached. The years that it was in the church, I would preach. So I'm getting dressed to go to this Thanksgiving service, and 3-year-old Shira's in the room, and she asked me where I'm going, and I say I'm going to church. And then I realize she's a 3-year-old Jew in Mission Viejo. She has no idea what a church is. So I say, do you know what a church is, honey? And she says, no. And I say, church is like shul for people who aren't Jewish. And she pauses for a minute, and she says, are there a lot of them? And I said, yes, honey, there are a lot of them. There are more of them than there are of us. This was news to her. And she sits for a minute with that. And then she says, do you know their names? So I still think the best thing we can do vis-a-vis anti-Semitism is give our children joy in being Jewish so that they love being Jewish and that that's the best response to the hate. I do think we need to talk to them about the many ways that our neighbors hate many people, including us, and that the hate is never justified. The hate is always a projection of ugliness within, projected out. And so to try to empower our kids not to take it in, not to ask, what did we do to deserve this? Not did what we do to cause this. Black people didn't cause white bigotry, right? And Asian people did nothing to cause the hatred towards Asians, right? Women did not cause male hatred and violence, right? So I think we have to teach them the same thing about anti-Jewish hate as we teach about all those other hates, which is that people whose worldview is based on power don't sleep well at night, because power is something that you seize and that can be seized from you, right? And that's why the Bible wants to give us a different basis for human organization, right? The Bible doesn't root its system in power, it roots it in love. Love is freely given and freely taken. It can't be coerced. right? But everyone in power is desperate to hold on to the power because they think that without it, they're vulnerable. Turns out that what makes them vulnerable is basing themselves on coercion. So teach your kid that. The haters aren't coming from a place of strength. They're showing you how weak they truly are. And so you walk with pride and you walk in love and stay open to those haters who are willing to have a conversation because they're desperate to be healed of the burden of their hate, right? And so stay open to that, but don't let the hate in. Don't become the mirror image of them. Thank you, everybody.